Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Phantom of the Drift. It was a cold November morning when the valiant Voyager, a research vessel that had been lost for over 30 years, reappeared without warning off the coast of Newfoundland. A heavy fog shrouded the sea, and the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. The ship's appearance wasn't so much a re-emergence but a haunting return. The world had long believed it had sunk, swallowed whole by the endless ocean, its crew members disappearing into the waves. But now, here it was, drifting aimlessly. Not a soul aboard. No distress signal. No survivors. Only the eerie silence of the sea. At first, the sight was chalked up to a mirage or a glitch in satellite imaging. That was until a rescue team was dispatched to board the vessel. What they found would torment them for the rest of their lives. And for some, even drive them to madness. Aboard the Salina coast, a deep-sea salvage ship, Captain Victor Hale stood at the helm, watching the misty horizon as his crew prepared to board the ghostly ship. They had been hired by a private investor with an interest in retrieving valuable equipment and research from the valiant Voyager. No one had expected to find anything other than rusted machines and abandoned crates. But something about this mission felt wrong from the start. "Captain, we're approaching," one of the crew members called out nervously. Victor squinted into the fog. The silhouette of the valiant Voyager was now clearly visible. But it was like a frozen specter from the past. Its masts broken, its hull battered as though it had been tossed around by violent storms for decades. Yet the ship was eerily still. "Prepare the boarding party," Victor ordered. "And make sure your radios are working. I don't want to be caught off guard." His first mate, Ray, had already started relaying instructions to the team. The air was thick with tension as the salvage crew lowered their boarding ropes, one by one, climbing down onto the deck of the valiant Voyager. Victor, as always, was the last to disembark. He hesitated for a moment, a chill creeping down his spine, but then forced himself to step down onto the deck. The silence was absolute. There were no signs of life, no crew, no movement. The ship appeared to be abandoned. But every inch of the deck seemed oddly preserved. There were no weathered stains, no signs of decay. And yet the air smelled stale, as though the ship had been frozen in time. As the crew began exploring the upper levels, Victor made his way into the captain's quarters. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room that looked as though it had been untouched for decades. The captain's log sat on the desk, the pages yellowed and brittle. Yet, when Victor opened it, the ink was fresh, as if written only moments ago. "The ship is not alone. The whispers are louder. We are being watched." The final entry was scrawled in a frantic hand, the last few words nearly unreadable, as if the captain had been interrupted in his writing. Victor's heart began to pound in his chest. This was no ordinary ghost ship. Something darker lingered in the corners of the ship. Something alive. Or worse, something dead that refused to let go. As the hours passed, the salvage crew ventured deeper into the valiant Voyager, discovering strange, unsettling details. Equipment was turned off yet still humming with residual power. The galley was stocked with food, untouched and perfectly preserved, as if the crew had just disappeared in the middle of a meal. Every room had the same eerie stillness. But the atmosphere grew heavier, more suffocating. With each step, "There's something down below," Ray whispered as he joined Victor on the lower decks. "I heard something, a voice." Victor paused, glancing around. The corridors were lined with shadows that twisted unnaturally. And for a moment, he thought he saw figures darting just out of the corner of his eye. "I think it's time to head back to the Salina coast," Victor said, his voice betraying a growing unease. "Something's not right." But as they turned to leave, the ship seemed to react. The door to the stairwell slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them on the lower deck. Panic spread like wildfire among the crew. "Who closed that door?" shouted one of the crew members, his voice high with fear. "No one," Ray muttered, eyes wide. "We're not alone on this ship." A cold wind swept through the ship, despite the absence of any open windows or portholes. The temperature dropped drastically, and the crew huddled together, trying to find a way out. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a whispering voice in the wind, but growing louder, closer. It was not in any language they could recognize, but it felt like a command. The whispers turned into a chant, a rhythmic, maddening hum that filled the ship's very bones. "Upstairs," Ray gasped. "We need to go to the bridge. There's something there." Victor led the way. But as they ascended, the voices grew more insistent, more aggressive. By the time they reached the top deck, it felt like the ship itself was alive, breathing, groaning in pain. The bridge was in disarray, papers scattered, and the navigation system blinking erratically. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, pressing down on their chests. And then, they saw it. At the far corner of the room, a figure sat in the captain's chair, its back to them. It was wearing an old, tattered naval uniform, its hands gripping the armrests tightly, as if frozen in place. Is that the captain?" Ray whispered. But Victor's heart skipped a beat. The figure turned slowly, and the face that met them was not human. The skin was pale and stretched thin, the eyes black voids that seemed to swallow light. The mouth moved, but no sound came out. It was as though the ship itself was feeding off their fear, amplifying it into a palpable presence that enveloped the entire crew. Then, in a voice that rattled their very bones, the captain spoke, "You should not have come. You are not meant to leave." The room seemed to implode with energy as a deafening crash shook the ship, and the crew was thrown to the floor. The figure at the helm let out a chilling, guttural laugh as the ship's engines roared to life. The valiant Voyager was moving, but it wasn't steering toward safety. It was steering them toward the heart of the storm. The storm that brewed outside was like no other. Waves rose impossibly high, crashing against the ship as it groaned and creaked under the immense pressure. But the valiant Voyager seemed to glide effortlessly through it, as though it were being controlled by some malevolent force. Inside the ship, chaos erupted. The crew scrambled to find a way out, but every exit was blocked by an unseen force. The whispers now grew into screaming, and the ship began to shake violently. One by one, the crew members vanished, taken by the vengeful spirits that had once called the valiant Voyager home. Victor and Ray fought their way to the deck, the storm roaring around them. The fog had cleared, revealing the true horror of their predicament. They were surrounded by countless other ships, all ghostly remnants of forgotten vessels that had met the same fate. "Is this what happens to ships that vanish?" Ray gasped, staring at the spectral fleet. "Do we become like them?" Victor knew the answer but couldn't bring himself to say it. There was no escape. As the valiant voyager sailed toward its final destination, Victor's mind was consumed by a single thought: once a ship becomes lost, it never truly returns. The valiant voyager disappeared into the abyss, leaving nothing behind but silence and darkness. Weeks later, the Salina coast was found drifting aimlessly in the same waters where the valiant voyager had vanished. No sign of the crew. No distress signals. But the whispering was there, drifting on the winds. And the ocean was calling again. Story 2: The Silent Drift. A month ago, a fishing vessel named the Marlin's Rest vanished without a trace in the foggy expanse of the North Sea. The crew, a seasoned group of fishermen, had set out for their usual route but never returned. No distress signals. No wreckage. Nothing. Since then, reports have emerged from the maritime community of strange sightings: a large ship drifting through the fog, its sails low, seemingly abandoned. Yet, no one has come forward to claim the ship, and the vessel never docks at any port. Some believe it is a ghost ship, a cursed remnant of a past tragedy. Others think it's a new ship with an unnerving reputation. Jack Walker, a journalist with a passion for maritime mysteries, is determined to uncover the truth. He takes a small boat out to the last known location of the Marlin's Rest. But what he encounters will forever change his perception of the sea. Jack's investigation begins in the quiet coastal town of Eastway, where the Marlin's Rest was last seen. The locals are tight-lipped, and the few who speak seem oddly fearful. The sight of Jack, with his notebook and camera, makes them uncomfortable. In a local bar, an old fisherman named Arthur finally tells him what he knows. Arthur recounts an old sailor's legend about ships that disappear into the mist, only to return years later, filled with the lost souls of their crews. These ships, cursed by the sea, drift aimlessly for eternity, carrying with them the screams of the damned. Jack isn't sure what to make of it, but he knows there's more to this than meets the eye. Armed with his research, Jack sets sail the following morning, determined to uncover the truth behind the disappearance. After a full day of searching, Jack spots the ship through the fog. It looms like a shadow on the horizon, eerily still. As he approaches, the details of the ship become clearer. Its once proud sails are now torn, and the hull is battered by time. Yet, there's no sign of life. Jack's boat drifts closer. The moment he boards the Marlin's Rest, a cold chill runs down his spine. The ship feels wrong, unnaturally quiet. It's as if the wind itself avoids the vessel. Jack explores the decks, taking photos of the abandoned equipment, the untouched dinner plates, and the eerie silence that hangs in the air. Suddenly, he hears footsteps behind him, whipping around. He finds no one. The air feels thick with dread. Jack finds a journal in the captain's quarters. The last entry dated just days before the ship vanished. The words are frantic, written hastily in an almost illegible script. The captain had warned of an unnatural force pulling the ship towards an island that did not appear on any map. The crew had been hearing whispers in the night, voices calling them to the sea, voices that seemed to come from the depths. Jack's curiosity gets the better of him. He ventures below deck, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. As he explores the lower levels, he sees something moving in the shadows, faint figures, like people, yet impossibly pale and skeletal, drifting silently past him. He calls out, but his voice seems to get lost in the oppressive silence. Suddenly, the air grows colder. The door slams shut behind him. Trapped in the belly of the ship, Jack realizes that the Marlin's Rest is not simply adrift, it is alive. Haunted by the restless spirits of its crew, the ship begins to move. Though no crew is steering it, it sails deeper into the fog, pushing Jack into a place where time seems to stand still. He realizes the Marlin's Rest is heading towards the same island the captain had written about in his journal. But as he nears the island, the fog grows denser, and the ship creaks ominously. The island is a place of nightmares, with towering cliffs and jagged rocks. The ship crashes onto the shore, and Jack is forced to disembark. He stumbles onto the black sand, the air thick with the smell of salt and decay. The island is no paradise, it is the resting place of all the souls who have been taken by the sea, trapped in an endless cycle of torment. As Jack explores, he encounters the spirits of the lost crew. They are not the peaceful, mournful souls he expected, they are aggressive, driven by a hunger for revenge. They blame the living for their fate, and now they want Jack to join them. In a desperate attempt to escape, Jack realizes the only way to break the curse is to destroy the source of the ship's power, an ancient, submerged altar beneath the island that has been drawing vessels into its grasp for centuries. He fights his way through the island's cursed inhabitants, finally reaching the altar. But as he prepares to destroy it, a sudden twist occurs. Jack learns that he is not the first to try to break the curse. The island has claimed many souls, and Jack is now one of them. His fate is sealed, and he realizes with horror that the Marlin's Rest was never a ship, it was a prison. As Jack attempts to escape the island, he is confronted by the same misty figures he saw aboard the ship, now fully corporeal, their eyes glowing with malice. They drag him back to the ship, where he is forced to take the place of the captain, forever bound to the cursed vessel. The Marlin's Rest drifts once more, its sails flapping in the windless sea, carrying the souls of the damned on an eternal journey through the fog. And now, Jack Walker's name is added to the long list of those who will never escape the ghost ship. Story 3: The Haunting of the Bellmere. The storm had settled by dawn, leaving behind an unsettling calm across the open sea. Captain Daniel Lawson stood at the helm of the Odyssey, staring at the horizon through his spyglass. The crew had heard the rumors, whispers of a cursed ship, the Bellmere, that disappeared a century ago, only to resurface under mysterious circumstances. No one dared venture near it until now. Lawson had his reasons. Years ago, his father, a sailor, had vanished at sea, with only his journal recovered, a waterlogged account of an encounter with the Bellmere. The final entry spoke of whispers from the abyss and a light that called from the dark. Lawson believed finding the ship would bring closure. By midday, the crew spotted it, a faint, flickering light on the horizon, like a dying lantern in the fog. As they approached, the ship loomed ahead, shrouded in mist. The Bellmere was massive and ancient, its once grand sails now torn and tattered. The hull was covered in barnacles, and an eerie stillness enveloped it. There was no sign of life, only the creaking of the wood as the ship swayed gently with the waves. "This is it," Lawson whispered, gripping the rail. The Bellmere. Once aboard, the Bellmere felt like a tomb. The deck was damp and decayed, with moss growing between the planks. The air was unnaturally cold, and a heavy silence hung over the crew. Despite the sunlight, the ship seemed perpetually cloaked in shadow. The crew began exploring, finding a vessel frozen in time. In the captain's quarters, dust-covered maps and journals lay undisturbed, as though someone had left them only moments before. Below deck, the eerie stillness was broken by faint whispers, low and indistinct, as if coming from the walls themselves. Claire, one of the investigators, paused in the galley. She heard footsteps behind her but found no one. Turning back, she stumbled upon a rotting lifeboat. Inside lay a man's body, perfectly preserved, his hollow, glassy eyes staring straight at her. She screamed, and the others came running. "It's like he's been waiting," one of them muttered, staring at the body. As night fell, the Bellmere came alive. The whispers grew louder, turning into groans and cries. Shadows danced along the walls, and the ship seemed to shift and breathe. The crew realized they were not alone. The following morning, a storm rolled in out of nowhere. Waves crashed violently against the Bellmere, and the sky darkened unnaturally fast. The crew took shelter, but a loud, thunderous crash from below deck drew them into the ship's depths. There, they found strange symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. "These markings, they're ancient," said Dr. Edwards, the team's historian. "They're not nautical, they're ritualistic." As the storm raged outside, Claire disappeared. The crew searched frantically, but the ship seemed to shift and twist, leading them in circles. They found her eventually, her body lifeless and her face frozen in terror. Her hands clutched a strange object, a black stone idol encrusted with glowing markings. "The ship, it's alive," one crew member stammered. "It's feeding on us." Desperation set in. They tried to leave, but the lifeboats were gone. The Bellmere refused to let them go. It groaned and creaked, as if mocking their attempts to escape. Captain Lawson, driven by grief and guilt, decided to confront the ship's curse. He remembered his father's journal and the warnings about the light that calls. He ventured alone into the bowels of the ship, where he found a hidden compartment. Inside was the black idol, resting on an altar surrounded by skeletal remains. As he touched it, the ship let out a deafening roar, and the whispers turned into screams. "The idol is the source," Lawson realized. "It's binding the ship to this curse." The remaining crew tried to destroy the idol, but as they did, the ship revealed its true nature. The wooden planks and sails transformed into decaying flesh and bone. The Bellmere was not just a ship, it was a living vessel of the damned, drifting between the realms of the living and the dead. In the final moments, Lawson made the ultimate sacrifice. He stayed behind to destroy the idol while the others escaped. The ship began to sink, pulled into a black vortex that had formed in the ocean. As the entity within the Bellmere screamed in fury, the ship vanished beneath the waves, leaving no trace of its existence. The survivors were rescued days later, but their relief was short-lived. On the horizon, they saw something impossible, a faint, flickering light in the fog. The Bellmere was still out there, waiting for its next victims. Years later, another ship disappeared near the same coordinates. The legend of the Bellmere lived on, a chilling reminder of the cursed vessel that sailed the seas, forever seeking souls to claim.